The ACC is on life support after the recent lawsuits from Clemson and Florida State. Let's get into it. Where this really started was Florida State going undefeated and being ACC champs, and then being left out of the college football playoff and for Alabama, who had a loss because Jordan Travis, Florida State's quarterback, was injured, and that's really where this started. Commissioner Jim Phillips of the ACC really did no help to Florida State in trying to bolster and get out in front and pitch for Florida State and why they should still be in the college football playoff, and he didn't do that. Florida State had had enough. There's been rumblings of them wanting out, so they sued the ACC in the middle of that lawsuit right now, and they're trying to get out of the ACC. A lot of people, myself included, believe this will be the last year that Florida State is in the ACC. Now, whether that means to go to the Big Ten or the SEC, we're in wait-and-see mode. Earlier this week, Clemson joined Florida State on the lawsuit to try to get out of the ACC in order to get to the SEC or the Big Ten, and there's rumors that Miami could following even the Virginia schools, but the big fish is UNC. But for this video, we're going to keep the Florida State and Clemson as they're the ones actively suing the ACC in order to get out. The ACC has this thing called the grant of rights with ESPN, which basically has all of the schools' broadcasting rights tied to the ACC network, which is going through 2036. But there is an opt-out in a couple years that a lot of people think ESPN could opt out of in order for the big market football schools in the ACC to go to a new conference a la the Big Ten, SEC, the Power 2. Clemson joined this lawsuit just like Florida State. They're wanting out, and it's not Florida State and Clemson's fault. It's just the ACC has fallen behind. They're the only two in the ACC that seem to really take football seriously, or at least in a year in, year out to contend. And Commissioner Jim Phillips has really done the ACC no favors. He has sat back on conference realignment, and you had the Big Ten, the SEC, and even the Big 12 getting out in the forefront and expansion and getting quality programs. But what did Jim Phillips do? He sat back, sat on his hands, did nothing, probably ate some Cheetos, and was just sitting there and just waiting. And that's why we have teams like SMU, Cal, and Stanford coming into the ACC. And no disrespect to those schools, but in an era where college football, it really drives the revenue, those schools are really not adding much. SMU possibly, but Cal and Stanford just really are not adding much outside of the Olympic sports. And to be quite frank, those sports really aren't mattering to the suits, which is why we are in the college space that we are in now. And you would think, after seeing what just happened to the Pac-12, and it is really sad what has happened to the Pac-12 and just what's happened to college football and college athletics overall, you would think a commissioner would want to get at the forefront and add some schools that could really bolster up the ACC, and that just hasn't happened. Well, yes, it sucks, and as a fan of a team in the ACC, it does suck that this is happening to my conference, but I don't blame Clemson, Florida State, Miami, because they're going to get in on this as well, because they have to look out for what's best for their schools and their programs, and staying in a conference that is at its deathbed just isn't very smart. And if you're Clemson, you are this big brand, you have been historically competing for national championships, you're going to want to get to a conference. And I imagine Florida State will end up in the SEC and Clemson will end up in the Big Ten. And don't get me wrong, Florida State versus LSU, Florida State versus Alabama and Auburn, Clemson against Ohio State, Michigan, and Oregon now with them being in the Big 12 are fun matchups to watch. But it just sucks that it has to come with these nationwide conferences and not scheduling home and homes while staying in the regionality, which is really what made college football and college athletics that much beautiful and why people loved it more than they might love the pro game. The ACC should have never become as bad as it did in football, because you had the Virginia territories, obviously the Carolinas, and then Florida and South Carolina. And outside of Florida State and Clemson, everyone just fell behind while they kept propelling, and which is why we're at where we're at. Jim Phillips has failed, as I've previously mentioned in this video. I imagine that they will try to expand again once Florida State, Clemson, and like I said, I imagine Miami all get out. Obviously, UNC is the big question mark because there was a law that was just passed, and since them and North Carolina State are public schools, the state of Carolina would have to pass in order for those two schools to move to a different conference. So that's kind of a big question mark with them. But the ACC is at its deathbed, and it just should not have come to this. I imagine ACC will expand and realign to try to replace those schools. But when you're losing your two biggest football brands in Florida State and Clemson is just not stable for a conference to stay. Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports had a great article detailing everything, and there's already talks of where schools are going to end up when it just happened. The ACC dissolves, with Louisville and Duke already being mentioned as being looked at by the Big 12. You actually have Clemson, Florida State, Miami, the Virginia schools in North Carolina State being looked at by the SEC and the Big 10. But I would imagine some schools like your Syracuse and Boston College, I would not be surprised to see those fall until what we used to call the Group of Five, with the AAC and the Conference USA and those types of conferences. It's going to be very different for fans of ACC and what we've been accustomed to knowing. But it just sucks that it's gotten to this point, and with this all could have been avoided if leadership could have led this conference and these schools in a different direction. But we're here. Don't be mad at Florida State and Clemson. Be mad at Commissioner Jim Phillips for sitting on his hands and not being at the forefront of conference realignment and just sitting back and waiting instead of taking initiative and taking action. I imagine, too, if he would have been out in the forefront after Florida State beat Louisville in the ACC conference game, Florida State could have got that push from someone in the committee room to really make it, and that just didn't happen, and that's why we sit where we sit. Even though there were already issues, that was just a compulsion, and that was really what pushed Florida State over the edge to know they have to get out of this conference. The ACC is dying, and it sucks to see. It is the conference that I've grew up with. It is my conference, and I hate that it's come to this, but these schools are really left with no chance and no choice. As always, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications, and let me know down in the comments, what are your thoughts on the ACC's collapse, and where do you think Clemson and Florida State ultimately do end up once they are out of the ACC contract?